The sky over New Geneva burned the color of rusted metal. As the Zarok fleet descended through tiered cloud like knives sliding into velvet, the ships were not the clean geometry of human design. They looked grown rather than built, obsidian exoskeletons ribbed with faintly bioluminescent seams. Where sunlight struck their hulls, it failed to reflect as if the light chose not to return to us. A child on the flood wall pointed and laughed, delight cutting through the low tide of fear that had lapped at the city for weeks. Everyone else watched in silence. Trains paused in tunnels. Street vendors left grills hissing unattended. A crane operator on harbor piers set an 8-ton container down as if it were porcelain. The world held its breath. They did not open fire. They made a pattern. 12 dagger ships arranged themselves in a ring that matched the geometry of a prehistoric stone circle outside Otis. An arrangement no human could have. Guessed from our scrambled transmissions. The ring's interior bloomed with a quiet, colorless aurora. A 13th vessel larger, darker. Its seams pulsing like a heartbeat descended into the circle and anchored in the air above Lake Lehman. Messages screamed across Earth's networks at once, encrypted, translated, rebroadcast, sanity checked. Every language, every dialect. We come to test. We offer treaty. For treaty, bond warrior to warrior. The word bond did more damage than any kinetic round could have. In minutes, the feeds split into warring interpretations: marriage, merger, host-parasite, ritual killing. Corporate pundits held up contracts and argued about clauses. Clerics thumbed prayer beads. Security analysts compared the dagger ships' positions to historical siege geometries and shook their heads. The Zarok did nothing except keep the 13th ship's heartbeat visible over the lake where every lens on Earth could stare. Inside the defense spire, 300 meters above the lake, Lieutenant Mara Ellison watched it alone for a moment before the briefing swallowed her. Mara carried her quiet like a blade. She had won the Martian siege by not blinking when the pressure alarms screamed. She had coaxed a shattered squad through the black tunnels of Titan Station. With a half-broken exosuit and a voice like gravel compassion, she had learned to tuck grief into the neat fold of a uniform pocket and touch it only when the lights were out. Her hair was regulation short, dark enough to drink light, her eyes the gray of orbital dawn. On her left wrist, a tattooed grid of stars marked the names of the dead, not their names. Never their names, just the sectors where they'd fallen. So she could say good night to each region when she passed overhead. The lift opened onto the strategic theater. The room was a tilted bowl of glass and steel, ringed by projection panes. A three-dimensional lattice of the Zarok formation hovered above a circular table, like a jewelry display designed by a very patient god. Around the table, Chancellor Amelik, a handful of admirals with faces cut from old glaciers, and Dr. Hannah Sato, lead Xenop psychologist, and the only person in the room wearing sneakers, Ellison. Admiral Park said, relief hidden behind his gravel. Good, sit. Mara did, spine straight. Sir. Dr. Sato, all sharp cheekbones and sleep-starved focus, spun the lattice with 2 fingers. They've repeated the message on a 15-minute cadence. The semantic core is extremely stable across languages. Bond is the non-trivial term. What does it mean? The Chancellor asked. The Chancellor's hands were steady on the table's lip. Her eyes flicked once toward the lake where the heartbeat pulsed. Sato's mouth flattened. We have 3 viable interpretations. 1, a symbolic oath between a human combatant and a Zarok warrior, binding our species to mutual defense. 2, a neural linkage bidirectional, intimate, potentially dangerous. 3, a biological symbiosis. The second is most likely given their neurotech signatures. The third is not impossible, Admiral Park grunted. We don't volunteer anyone for option 3. Option 2 might be worse, another admiral said. What if the linkage is permanent? What if it breaks the subject? We'd be offering a soldier's mind as a lock they can pick at leisure. The alternative is rejecting the test, the Chancellor said. She didn't raise her voice. The room leaned closer anyway. And then, Sato expanded the lattice to reveal another pattern, a ghostly constellation beyond Pluto. Their message included coordinate seeds and timestamps. We decrypted enough to identify to other systems. Both refused. In each, a Zarok fleet held position for 10 planetary rotations. Then, absence. No emissions, no lights. That doesn't prove annihilation, but it proves the limits of our leverage. The Chancellor finished. We cannot bluff. The debate that followed sliced the next hour into thin, bleeding minutes. Lawyers argued treaties, generals argued honor, doctors argued survival, and someone from public sentiment kept saying the word narrative, until Admiral Park asked him not to say it again. Through it all, Mara listened and measured. The beat of the 13th ship tremored faintly through the glass with a rhythm that found her ribs. The first wave of volunteers formed in the spire's lower levels before the meeting had even adjourned. The call had been quiet enough to test sincerity, and still they came. Special forces with steady pupils, pilots with reflexes like falling knives, mech crews with scarred knuckles. They clustered in lines that didn't quite hold, shifting with the anxious choreography of people about to make an irreversible choice. Cameras were banned, and still there were cameras. The world leaks where it wants to. Mara did not move. She waited for the scream in her chest to settle into something intelligible. She thought of Titan, the contract job that had become a siege, the flayed corridors that smelled like coin and cold metal, the pressure doors that didn't close fast enough. She remembered Sergeant Lila Doss's last look before the flood took her, and the way every debrief afterward had tasted like apology. She remembered the day she had realized that the people who didn't want her to volunteer had never had to look a dying friend in the eyes and say, "I'll make it matter." When the meeting adjourned, Mara was the last to leave. She took the service stairs because the lift felt too easy for a decision like this. At the recruitment level, she found the volunteer lines snaking around the atrium's armor glass trunk. She joined the end of the first queue, hands clasped behind her back like she was lining up for target practice at dawn. A corporal with a clipboard, a real clipboard, because old tools felt honest, looked up and blinked. "Lieutenant Ellison." "Ma'am, just Mara." Her smile was quick and thin. "Paperwork still trumps rank, right?" He swallowed. "Right, screenings on 4. They took blood like it might confess. They mapped her nervous system with a lattice of cold pads and pulsing nodes. They fitted her with a thin crown nested with microfilaments and asked her to match patterns, predict vectors, breathe through pain that bloomed in her skull like thunderstorms. The tests looked for certain kinds of resilience, not merely endurance, but adaptivity, not merely courage, but the ability to stay permeable while under threat. "We need someone who can open a door and leave it open," Dr. Sato explained, floating between stations like a warding spirit. "Most people slam it shut when fear comes in." Mara touched the crown as a tech removed it. "And if fear lives here full-time, then you know its name." Sato's smile was almost warm. "That helps." Outside the screening suite, a pilot threw up into a paper bag and then asked for another shot at the test. A mech tech, tall, defiant, knuckles cracked white, stared at the floor with eyes like the moments before a storm breaks. A sniper with eyelashes longer than seemed fair sat very still and tried to slow his breathing. Courage has 1,000 faces and 1,000 ways to crack. The first round eliminated almost everyone. It wasn't that they weren't brave. It was that bravery couldn't fake the particular kind of softness the bond would need. The results came quickly, ruthlessly. Some of those cut, cheered, and clapped the survivors on the back and masked their relief with jokes. Some argued. A few cried privately in restrooms that smelled of antiseptic citrus and returned to duty. The ones who remained watched each other with a wariness. That wasn't competition so much as recognition. "If not me, then you. And I will love you for it and hate the world that requires it." Mara passed to the second round with a number code and a silence that felt like a cliff edge. In the brief hours between tests, she walked to the flood wall. The heartbeat over the lake persisted, steady as a metronome. Boats had been cleared. The water below held the Zarek ship's shadow like a bruise. In the old quarter behind her, a street musician played a cello with 2 strings missing and somehow made it sound like a prayer. Her wrist buzzed. A message. "Call me." It was from Aaron, her brother, the one who had moved to the desert to grow something that didn't involve machines. He answered on the first ring, voice already hoarse. "Mara, don't do it." She leaned against the cold stone. "Hi, hello, good afternoon, nice to hear from you too. Don't joke. I know that tone." "Which one?" "The one you had when you volunteered for Mars. The one you had when..." He stopped himself, but she could hear tighten unsaid, heavy between them. You don't have to fix the entire species. Someone has to try. The wind lifted a strand of hair to tickle her forehead. She tucked it back with a gloved finger. And I'm good at this, being brave, being open. She surprised herself with the word. Aaron was quiet long enough for a gull to wheel and vanish into the glare. There has to be a way to be open that doesn't break you. There is. I'll find it. She softened her voice. Hey, do you still go out to the mesa at night? Sometimes. Look up tonight. If you see anything weird, it's probably me. She made it a joke because if she made it a promise, it would hurt too much. Damn it, Mara. I love you too. The second round was different. No electrodes this time, no pain. Instead, they sat her in a small room with a table, a carafe of water, and a wall whose color refused to be named. Dr. Sato sat across from her and produced a folded square of metal from her pocket. When she opened it, it breathed. The surface rippled like mercury, then settled into a gray mirror that showed nothing of the room. Only Mara's face stripped of all context. Hypnosis? Mara asked lightly. Sato snorted. I wish it were that easy. She tapped the square. This is a hush foil. We think the Zarok use a related technology to quiet and focus shared cognition. I want to see how your attention behaves when the world stops feeding you. For 15 minutes. Sato asked questions that were not questions. What color is the number 8? What memories are jealous of your attention? Where in your body is tomorrow? While Mara stared into a mirror that erased everything but what she brought with her. Some answers came quickly. Some came slow and embarrassed. Some did not come at all. Sato's left sneaker tapped a rhythm that didn't match the ship's heartbeat outside. The dissonance made Mara's thoughts vibrate like plucked wires when it ended. Sato folded the hush foil gently. You know how to listen to yourself without drowning, she said. That's rare. How rare? Sato's mouth pulled to one side. We started with 300. We're at, she checked a slate, 5. How many do you need? 1, maybe 2, in case one of you breaks early. Sato watched her carefully. Do you want to withdraw? Mara wanted 1,000 things. To sleep without choking on vacuum. To call Lila's mother and know what to say. To stand in Aaron's greenhouse and let the breath of tomatoes and sun-warm irrigation soak into her. Until she smelled like something that had never seen a battlefield. To be small, briefly, and beloved, and safe. No, she said. I want to go outside. They took her to the observation deck. No one had asked the Zarok to come closer, and yet they had. A fissure had opened in the 13th ship's belly. No gangway. No shuttle, just a widening seam that showed a darkness deeper than the sky. Air licked out of it from time to time, stirring the lake's surface without raising a ripple on the observation glass. The heartbeat was louder here. Like distant thunder you only notice after it's already rewritten the weather. On the far side of the glass, a figure moved within the seam, a silhouette too large for the human eye to gladly accept. For arms, shoulders that would make 2 of her, a head crowned with a crest that curved backward like a blade of night. It paused as if tasting the air, and then, impossible to explain, looked at her. Mara had fought men who believed staring was domination. This was not that. This was appraisal. Yes, and a weighing of dangers, but beneath it there was a curiosity so precisely matched to her own that the back of her throat stung. Is that Admiral Park's voice came over the deck speakers, reluctant to break whatever this was. Sato. Sato's reply was soft. A Zarok warrior, likely their envoy. He's selected the observation deck for visual contact, or he's selected Mara. Don't anthropomorphize, Park grumbled. I'm xenopsychologizing, Sato said. Different sin. The warrior raised one hand, palm outward. His skin armor caught no light. Fine ridges patterned it like bark that had learned calculus. When his fingers extended, she saw that each tipped in a claw blunt enough to suggest restraint. He held the hand steady, not a demand but an offering. Mara lifted her own palm to the glass. The heartbeat changed, not louder, closer. The glass hummed fractionally under her skin as if the ship were singing in a register. She could only feel. For an instant she thought she felt a second pulse, faint and not hers, fluttering like a trapped bird between her ribs. Contact duration 12 seconds. Sato murmured into the room. Subject shows no distress. Pupil dilation normal. Cortisol steady. Translation: Park asked. She's not afraid in the wrong way, Sato said. She's afraid in the useful way. The warrior lowered his hand. He bowed not deeply, a nod that acknowledged risk taken on both sides, and withdrew into the seam. The fissure closed. The heartbeat retreated to its original distance. Sato exhaled. The sound of a bet she hadn't realized she made paying out. Well, then, the world learned of the test in the worst possible way, not from the council's plan briefing, but from a shaky clip taken by a janitor with the reflexes of a paparazzo and the conscience of a child. It went everywhere at once. The faces of the 5 candidates were blurred. The silhouette of the warrior was not. The clip ended with the shot of Mara's palm on the glass. Her hand looked small, enough to be a joke, until people saw that the glass thrummed. They named her the Bond before anyone could stop them. The third round happened deep under the lake where the light could not gossip. The 5 sat in a circle, surrounded by cables like black vines. Sato's team moved with the choreographed calm of people who had rehearsed more than they hoped to perform. A medic, thin, tattooed with maps of continents he'd never seen, checked pulses and cracked jokes too quietly for anyone to laugh. The air tasted like clean filters and feared. Sato stood in the circle's open mouth. You can still withdraw, no stigma. We'll say the screening eliminated you if you like. Only I will know the truth, and I don't gossip at dinner parties. No one moved. Sato nodded as if to people whose choices she respected. We'll be testing a low-bandwidth cognitive handshake. Think of it like resting your forehead against a closed door. You'll feel warmth through the wood. You will not yet see the room beyond. What if the door opens? Asked the sniper with the long eyelashes. He wasn't making a joke either. Then you've passed, and we stop immediately, Sato said. We don't throw anyone through a door on a test run. Mara believed her. That wasn't a given. They lowered the crowns onto the 5 heads and dimmed the room to a dusk human nerves could breathe in. Mara felt the faint pinch as microfilaments tasted her scalp. The hum began, first in the bones behind her ears, and then in the roof of her mouth. It was a tone a throat could never sing. The world narrowed to a corridor she hadn't walked in years, the one between breath in and breath out. The warmth came. Not heat, not pressure, presence. Something on the other side of a door paying attention. It was not like being watched. It was like being listened to by a silence that had learned patience in other constellations. She kept her breathing steady, her mind a lake whose surface her old drill sergeant would have called acceptable. She let the presence feel the shape of her without thrusting herself at it. Enthusiasm can be a form of violence. Across the circle, the pilot twitched once and went still, a string cut. The medic's gloved hands were there before the crown had fully slid from her scalp. I'm okay, she whispered, mortified. But her pupils were blown wide and her breath came hot and stuttered. She was not okay. They led her out as kindly as one can lead a person whose eyes had just looked at a horizon too big to fit a human day inside it. The mech tech held on 12 seconds and then began to shake. Not from fear, but from the effort of keeping a door shut. That, too, disqualified him. You cannot walk into a bond braced to slam. He knew it. He cried only when he realized Sato would not let him try again. The sniper lasted a full minute, and the presence grew curious, pressing politely against the grain of his thoughts. When the medic touched his shoulder, his relief was enormous and terrifying. He had wanted to vanish inside that warmth. He had nearly asked to. The crown came off. He laughed once, too loud, then covered his face with both hands. Mara stayed. Breath in, breath out. The presence made a shape on the other side of the wood. If it had a name, it was not a sound. If it had a face, it would not fit our geometry. She showed it, quietly. An ordinary thing. The curve of a spoon in Aaron's greenhouse catching the morning. The way Lila used to hum when she was too tired to sleep. The tender cruelty of gravity. The presence answered with a single detail she could hold without breaking. The taste of iron. That was not blood, carried on wind that had never touched water. The door did not open. It did not need to. When the crowns were lifted, the room felt too bright and too small. Sato circled the 5 empty chairs as if counting cost in the negative. She stopped behind Mara. Congratulations, she said softly. If you want them. Mara did not ask them who. She knew. The council meeting the next morning should have been pomp and speechcraft. It wasn't. It was 22 minutes of logistics balanced on a needle of terror. Treaties were drafted with blanks where names would go. Physicians argued with engineers about fail-safes that could not be built for doors that did not have hinges. Chancellor Amelie signed with a pen that had once belonged to her grandmother and then put the pen down with the care of someone setting a weapon on a negotiating table. Lieutenant Ellison, the chancellor said. Breaking the room's held breath. Do you understand the limits of our knowledge? Yes, Mum. Do you understand that those limits may be where you live now? Mara thought of doors and hushfoil, of iron tastes and heartbeat thunder, of the way the warrior had lifted his hand and made the space between bodies matter less. Yes, do you choose this anyway? Mara looked past the glass at the ship over the lake, at the shadow it planted, at the child on the flood wall, who had laughed because knives and cloud are still magic. When you are small. She touched the tattoo at her wrist with her thumb. The invisible names were warm there. I do, she said. Admiral Park swore very quietly into his sleeve. Dr. Sato rubbed her eyes and smiled like a sunrise smuggled into a bunker. The chancellor nodded once. Then in 1 hour, you will meet their envoy. The elevator down to the lake-level chamber felt like a descent through stacked heartbeats. On each floor a different set of hands adjusted something that might matter. Seals, cables, contingencies, prayers. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a room engineered to be symmetrical and therefore fair human logic. Written into architecture, the far wall was not a wall. It was the lake itself, held back by a pressure field tuned to the Zarek ship's hum. Beyond it, the fissure in the ship widened like an invitation written in a language too old for ink. Sato adjusted the crown in Mara's hands, a sleeker, meaner thing than the test rig. This is just a translator, she said, lying with love. You can step away at any moment. We will not hold you. Hold me? Mara hooked a smile onto the word. You'd have to catch me first. Fair point. Sato's hand hesitated, then landed on Mara's shoulder, warm, anchoring. Don't try to be impressive. Try to be true. The seam pulsed. A figure emerged with the same deliberate grace she'd seen from the observation deck. Up close, the scale rearranged her 8 feet, and then some, shoulders like quarried stone, forearms held close to the torso with the formal posture of someone trained never to frighten children. Texture ran in intricate whirls across armor-like skin. Bioluminescent threads pulsed under the surface in patterns that might have been language or breath. 2 upper eyes the color of old embers, 2 lower, smaller, a darker red, set wider. They moved in sequence, not together, giving the impression of a mind that could layer its attention without tearing. When the envoy spoke, the air vibrated and the ship answered, and the water beyond the field puckered into tiny dimples. As if listening, warrior, he said, and the translator caught the shape of it, rolling the syllables into something the human brain could hold without burning. You are small. The corners of his mouth did a thing that might have been amusement or warning. But small things can be sharp. Mara, whose brain had been forged in rooms like this, let her mouth move before fear could eat her tongue. And big things can be slow. The envoy stilled. The lower eyes narrowed. Then the sound came, not laughter exactly, but a relaxation in the hum around them that felt like air after a storm. Behind Mara, someone exhaled hard and tried to disguise it as a cough. The envoy lifted one of his hands, not the dominant set. She thought idly. If dominance even mapped across species and extended it, palm outward, the gesture was not identical to yesterday's, but it rhymed with it. I am Kethra, he said. The syllables were thick, a road of stones in the mouth. I will meet you at the door. Mara slid the crown onto her head. The filaments kissed her skin, hot cold. She let her hands fall to her sides where no one could see them shake. Beyond the field, the lake shivered. Above, the ship's heartbeat changed key. She lifted her face to the darkness that wasn't empty and breathed once, twice, like she had been taught on a range when the target is far and the wind is a rumor. Then open it, she said, and the door began to move. The first was that the words 8 feet tall did no justice to what those numbers meant when embodied. The alien was not simply tall. He was present, a mass of muscle and armor and alien grace that bent the very air around him. Forearms rested at his sides. their motions too smooth and deliberate to be anything but disciplined. His skin, if it could be called skin, was a deep obsidian, crisscrossed with glowing cerulean lines that pulsed faintly like veins carrying not blood, but energy. And those eyes, for in total, too larger and ember-colored, too smaller and darker, studied her with an intensity that was neither hostile nor friendly, merely curious. The second thing she realized was that fear had weight, but so did resolve, and the latter was heavier. The chamber they stood in was vast and round, a hybrid construction of human steel and Zarak biomatter. The ceiling arched impossibly high, its surface alive with thin veins of light that pulsed in time with the heartbeat-like hum of the alien ship. In the center stood a daze of living crystal, translucent and warm to the touch, where the bonding ritual would take place. Kethra was already there, waiting. When Mara entered, the alien inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been a bow or merely acknowledgement. "You are small," he said, his deep, resonant voice vibrating through the chamber's floor. Mara smirked despite herself. "And you're enormous. Guess we'll both have to make adjustments." The alien's four eyes blinked in sequence, upper left, lower right, upper right, lower left, before a low, rumbling sound escaped his throat. It took Mara a moment to realize he was laughing. "Sharp tongue," Kethra said. "It suits a warrior. Sharp words, sharper blade." She rested a hand on the sidearm holstered at her hip. "More a comfort than a threat. That's how we survive. Then we understand one another," the alien replied. Stepping forward, the ground shuddered faintly under his weight as he approached, but his movements were surprisingly fluid, almost feline. When he stood before her, he was close enough that Mara had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He was colossal, but he wasn't monstrous. His breathing was steady, his presence deliberate. Everything about him suggested that he was used to command and used to being feared. "Tell me," Kethra said, "why you came." Mara blinked. "I was ordered." "Lies," he rumbled. "I know orders. They have a smell. Yours do not. Why are you here?" There it was, the question she had avoided even asking herself. She could have said duty. She could have said honor. But the truth was more complicated. "I'm here," she said quietly, "because I'm tired of burying friends. Because if there's a chance this bond could stop more graves from being dug, I'll take it." Kethra's lower eyes softened, a subtle but noticeable shift. "Then we are not so different." The preparation bonding ritual was scheduled for the next day. That night, Mara was taken to a preparation chamber deep within the alien ship, a living, breathing corridor whose walls flexed and pulsed gently, as if the vessel itself were alive and watching. Dr. Hannah Sato, the xenopsychologist assigned to monitor the procedure, walked beside her with a tablet full of medical readouts. "You should know," she said, her tone clinical but kind. "Once the neural bridge is established, it's irreversible. The bond will fade if one of you dies, but otherwise, it will last for the rest of your life." Mara swallowed. "Will it hurt?" "Yes," Sato said plainly, "but not in the way you're thinking. It's not pain like a broken bone. It's pain like realizing someone else's childhood, their grief, their rage, their joy. You'll feel all of it, and they'll feel yours. And if we're not compatible..." Sato hesitated. "Then one or both of you could lose yourselves." That thought followed Mara into sleep, a restless, shallow drift through half-dreams of alien skies and strange laughter. The bonding next morning. The chamber was filled with both species, human generals and Zarak elders, translators and scientists, each group watching the other with equal parts awe and suspicion. In the center, the days pulsed brighter than before, alive with streams of alien energy. Kethra stood on one side, Mara on the other. Between them, a small pedestal rose from the floor, bearing two thin, curved devices like bone-forged crowns. "Step forward," an elder Zarak commanded. His voice was ancient and deep, resonating through the room. "The bond begins with truth. You will show one another who you are." Mara and Kethra approached. As they did, the room fell utterly silent. Even the hum of the ship seemed to still. Kethra extended his lower left hand, a gesture that, she'd been told, was the Zarak equivalent of vulnerability. Hesitating only a moment, Mara reached out and placed her hand in his. His skin was warm, not cold and reptilian as she'd expected, and the contact sent a faint electric buzz through her arm. "Now," the elder said, "let your minds open." The crowns were lowered onto their heads. They were heavier than they looked, humming with faint, alien frequencies. The moment both were secured, a surge of light burst from the daze, and Mara's world shattered. Shared mindset began with color, impossible, searing colors that had no names. Then came sensations, the dry crackle of sand beneath 3 moons, the weightless drift of swimming through a crystalline atmosphere, the ache of a mother's death song sung across light years. These weren't memories. They were experiences, poured directly into her consciousness, Kethra's memories. She saw him as a hatchling, clinging to the armored hide of his broodmother as predators circled. She felt the sting of a warrior's first wound, the triumph of his first kill. She tasted the bitterness of betrayal, a comrade who turned coward on the eve of battle, and the cold satisfaction of vengeance. And then, deeper still, the sorrow, the endless war, the worlds lost, the friends buried. She felt the weight of command pressing down on him, the same weight she had felt every day since Titan. And through it all, she felt his curiosity. Not for Earth, not for humanity, but for her. The link reversed, and now he was seeing her. Childhood on the lunar colonies, laughter in the gravity wells, the grief of holding Lila's dying hand on Titan Station. He felt her rage, her guilt, her relentless will to keep going even when everything around her screamed to stop. It was too much. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen had Kethra not caught her with one of his lower arms. "Hold," he whispered in her mind, not a voice, but a presence. She clung to the thread of his consciousness like a lifeline. The flood slowed. Their thoughts began to synchronize, jagged edges smoothing into harmony. She felt where she ended and he began, but the border was softer now. Porous. When the light finally dimmed, they stood facing each other, breathless and trembling. Kint's silence that followed was not the cold silence of strangers, but the intimate hush of shared understanding. Mara stared up at Kethra, and he looked down at her, not as alien and human, but as to warriors who had lived parallel lives on different stars. Bond complete, the elder declared. "You are no longer two. You are one." Kethra's upper right hand rose, trembling slightly, the closest thing she'd seen to vulnerability from him. He extended it toward her. "You are not prey," he said softly. "You are kin." Mara hesitated only a moment before clasping his hand. "And you're not a monster," she replied. "Your family." For a long moment, they simply stood there, warrior and warrior, soldier and soldier, bound not by blood, but by choice. In that instant, something changed. It wasn't just them. It was the room. The humans watching no longer saw a towering alien and a fragile woman. They saw a pair, an alliance, a future. And though neither of them spoke, both knew the same unspoken truth. This bond would change everything. It would change the war. It would change humanity. And perhaps most of all, it would change them. The alliance between humanity and the Zarok was meant to be the dawn of a new era. At least, that was the hope. The story the council repeated in speeches and broadcast across the colonies. They called it the Bond Accord, a name designed to make people believe that fear had finally given way to trust. But hope is fragile, and peace even more so. It lasted exactly 47 days. A storm on the horizon. First reports came from the outpost world of Kalira 9, a water-rich moon orbiting a pale blue gas giant beyond the fringe of human space. Kalira's value wasn't in its resources, but in its location. It was a gateway between the Terran expansion routes and the uncharted sectors that stretched beyond. The colony's last transmission was a garbled burst of static and screaming. 12 hours later, reconnaissance drones sent to investigate were vaporized before they even reached orbit. And then the message came. It wasn't a transmission, not in any language humanity could parse. It was a projection, broadcast directly into every neural network across the solar system. A towering figure cloaked in shadows, eyes like burning coals, speaking in a voice that seemed to bypass the ears entirely. "Children of dust and carrion, we warned the Zarok what would come if they defiled their honor with you. Break the bond, or burn." It was signed with a single word, Zarn. Kethra went rigid the moment he heard it. They were standing in the War Council chamber, the holographic map of Kalira flickering between red and black. When his claws tightened into the alloy railing hard enough to leave marks, "They come," he said, his deep voice almost trembling. "We knew they might. I prayed they would not." "Who are they?" Mara asked. "An old enemy," he said, turning his crimson eyes toward her. "Older than your species' first fire. The Zarn Dominion has fought the Zarok for over 1,000 cycles. They claim dominion over all bonded species and they kill those who refuse to kneel. And now," Admiral Park said grimly, "we're next, too." The War Council's chamber was a storm of competing voices. Generals argued for preemptive strikes. Politicians demanded diplomatic channels. Zarok war masters, massive even by their species' standards, snarled promises of vengeance. Mara listened, silent, until she couldn't anymore. "They're not bluffing," she said, standing. "Kalira wasn't a raid. It was a warning. And if we sit here debating treaties, we're going to lose every colony beyond Jupiter before the month's out. And what do you propose?" "Lieutenant," one senator sneered, "we don't even know where they're coming from." She tapped the side of her temple. "We might." Kethra understood immediately. "The bond," he murmured. "Yes. We may reach them before they reach us." The room fell silent. They all knew what she meant. The neural link between Mara and Kethra was more than just a conduit for shared thought. It was a bridge between two entire civilizations. Through it, they could tap into Zarok war memories, strategic archives, and centuries of combat data. More importantly, they might sense the Dominion before it struck. It was risky. The deeper they dived into the bond, the more blurred their identities became. Too deep, and they risked losing themselves entirely, becoming something new and uncontrollable. But they didn't have a choice. 3. Mind's Eye ritual chamber was dark and cold, the only light a pulsing sapphire glow emanating from the days at its center. Mara and Kethra stood across from each other, crowns affixed to their temples. "Are you ready?" Kethra asked. Mara forced a breath. "Let's find them." The surge hit harder than before. It wasn't a flood this time, it was an explosion. Memories slammed into her, 1,000 battlefields, 1,000 screams. The weight of empires rising and falling. She saw Zarok warfleets clashing with Zarn juggernauts in the void of space. Entire planets glassed under the Dominion's black fire. And deeper still, she felt them. The Zarn weren't like the Zarok. Where Kethra's people were warriors with honor, the Dominion were something older, colder, hungrier. They moved like a plague across the stars, absorbing or annihilating every species they encountered. Their strength wasn't in brute force, but in their hive mind. Countless minds linked into one vast intelligence. Each battle a carefully orchestrated symphony of terror. She felt their presence, not here, but close. To close, Epsilon Sector, she gasped, opening her eyes. "They're coming for Epsilon." 4. The Battle of Epsilon Epsil Prime was a jewel among human colonies. A terraformed world with sprawling oceans, thriving cities, and a population of 50 million. It was also the keystone of the outer defense grid. If Epsilon fell, Earth itself would be vulnerable. There was no time to prepare. Within 48 hours, Dominion fleets warped into the system, monstrous, spined vessels that devoured starlight and spat plasma storms. Human defenses shattered within the first hour. Orbital stations crumbled. Planetary shields flickered and died. The Joint Earth-Zarok Task Force launched a desperate counteroffensive, and at its spear point stood Mara and Kethra. Their unit was unlike any the galaxy had seen. Mara inside a prototype mechanized exosuit, a towering, four-armed warframe modeled after Zarok physiology, while Kethra commanded a ground phalanx of heavy infantry. Their bond allowed them to move as one. When Mara's exosuit raised its arm to fire, Kethra's soldiers flanked without being told. When Kethra sensed an ambush, Mara pivoted the mech to intercept before orders even left his lips. They were not two leaders. They were one mind split between two bodies. The Dominion noticed. Wave after wave of drone soldiers, faceless, insectal things, swarmed the cities. Mara's exosuit carved through them with plasma cannons and rail-mounted blades, while Kethra's warriors tore them apart with claws and shock lances. But the enemy kept coming, endless as the void. "This isn't sustainable," Mara panted over the link, dodging a blast that turned a skyscraper into molten slag. "They seek to overwhelm." Kethra replied. They believe we will break. Then let's prove them wrong. The Turning Point Dominion's flagship, a monstrous dreadnought known as the Oblivion Womb, entered orbit and began charging a planet-cracking weapon. They had hours, maybe less, before Epsilon was reduced to dust. There was only one option: infiltrate the dreadnought and destroy it from within. The mission was suicide, and both of them knew it. Together, Mara asked as the assault pod sealed around them. Always, Kethra answered. The infiltration was chaos. Zarok shock troops carved a path through the dreadnought's hull, but the carters inside were a maze of shifting, organic architecture. They fought through hordes of biomechanical defenders, their every movement perfectly coordinated through the bond. Finally, they reached the core, a pulsing heart of dark energy, surrounded by tendrils of living machinery. It was protected by a shield that no weapon could pierce. We can't destroy it, Mara said. Not from out here. There's another way, Kethra replied, his eyes locking onto hers. The Unity Protocol. Mara's heart skipped. The Unity Protocol was theoretical, a full fusion of their neural patterns, merging them into a single consciousness capable of rewriting alien technology from within. It was forbidden for a reason. No one knew if they would survive, but there was no time left. Do it, she whispered. Vi. One mind bond deepened, deeper than either of them had ever dared go. The walls between them dissolved. Memories, instincts, fears, dreams, they all became one. And in that unity, they found power. Together, they reached into the core's neural lattice and rewrote it, bending the Dominion's weapon to their will. Systems screamed and died. Alarms howled across the dreadnought as energy reversed course and detonated inward. The explosion was colossal. The Oblivion Womb tore itself apart from the inside out, its fragments raining harmlessly into Epsilon's atmosphere. The Dominion fleet, leaderless and disoriented, retreated. VII. Aftermath. Mara awoke 3 days later in a med bay aboard the flagship Vigilant Dawn. Every muscle ached, every nerve burned, but she was alive. Kethra sat beside her, his massive form bandaged and scarred, but his eyes glowed with quiet relief. You are whole, he said softly. So are you, she replied, a tired smile tugging at her lips. Mostly, they sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had done settling around them. They had saved Epsilon. They had saved millions. But in doing so, they had crossed a line. Their bond was no longer just a connection. It was a fusion. They were no longer entirely separate beings. What happens now? She asked. Now, Kethra said, his voice heavy with both pride and sorrow. The galaxy will see us for what we are. Not human. Not Zarok. Something new. And the Dominion? They will come again, he said. Harder. Stronger. They will not forgive this humiliation. Mara stared out the viewport at the stars beyond, each one a distant, burning promise. Then we'll be ready, she said. And deep within the bond that now tied them together irrevocably, she felt Kethra's agreement, not in words, but in a shared pulse of defiance and determination. The shadows of war were far from gone. They were only just beginning. The Dominion had underestimated the bond. They had believed that humans and Zarok would shatter under the pressure of war, that fear and mistrust would devour the alliance from the inside. Instead, Mara and Kethra had proven the impossible. Two species could think as one. They had shown the galaxy that unity was not a weakness, but a weapon. And the Zarn Dominion, ancient, arrogant, and utterly ruthless, now knew they had something to fear. Within weeks of their defeat at Epsilon, Dominion fleets vanished from the border systems. Human scouts reported abandoned outposts and derelict ships floating in silent formation. At first, Command thought they were retreating, but Mara and Kethra knew better. They're adapting, Kethra growled, his eyes narrowing as he studied the latest reconnaissance data. It is how the Dominion survives. They fail, they evolve, and they return stronger. How strong? Mara asked. He looked at her, and through their bond, she felt the weight of his memories. Entire civilizations swallowed whole. Planetary shields ripped apart like paper. Hive fleets that darkened stars. Strong enough, Kethra said softly, that the next time they come, they will not stop until one of us is extinct. A fragile peaceth months that followed were the most unstable in human history. Earth's leaders signed the Zarak Defense Treaty, binding the two species in a formal military alliance. Massive warship production began in orbit over Mars and Europa. Training programs integrated human and Zarak troops into joint strike units. But peace was a thin veneer stretched over the certainty of coming war. The bond between Mara and Kethra became both a symbol of hope and a source of fear. News channels called them the Twin Mind. Crowds cheered their names on Earth, on Zarak Prime, even in colonies that had once feared alien contact. But in the darker corners of politics and power, there were whispers that they were no longer truly human or Zarak, that the bond was a threat to identity itself. Some in the military wanted them dissected, others wanted them hidden. The Dominion wanted them dead. Through it all, Mara and Kethra continued their work, training troops, sharing intelligence, strengthening the fragile alliance. Yet each night, when the bond quieted and they were left with only the echoes of each other's thoughts, they felt the same creeping truth: this peace cannot last. The Eclipse Offensivite began with the disappearance of the colony ship Aurora Dawn. The vessel, carrying over 20,000 settlers to the Proxima frontier, vanished without a trace. Hours later, the Dominion announced their return. Their fleets poured from hyperspace near the ecliptic rift, a narrow corridor of folded space that led directly toward Earth. It was the most vulnerable route, and the most dangerous. They mean to strike at the heart, Admiral Park said grimly, staring at the war map. They're not targeting colonies anymore. They're coming for Earth itself. Then we stop them here, Mara said. Before they reached the rift, the plan was desperate: launch a combined fleet into the rift and meet the Dominion head-on. The fighting would be brutal: no retreat, no fallback, no reinforcements. Victory or annihilation. At the center of the battle group would be Mara and Kethra. Their minds, joined as one, would coordinate the entire fleet, human, Zarak, and allied species alike, with a precision no single commander could match. Into the rift fleet entered the ecliptic rift under a shroud of artificial darkness, their engines silent against the void. It was a graveyard of broken stars and dead worlds, a place where light itself seemed reluctant to exist. Do you feel it? Mara asked as the vigilant dawn approached the front line. Kethra nodded. Yes, the Dominion is here. And then the void erupted. Hundreds of Zarn warships poured from the rift's far end, blacker than the vacuum around them. Bioorganic dreadnoughts the size of moons loomed over the battlefield, each bristling with weapons that could level continents. Swarms of smaller vessels flitted between them like predatory insects. Fleet engagement in 3, 2. The stars themselves seemed to shatter as the two armadas collided. Mara's exosuit launched from the vigilant dawn's hangar, its thrusters screaming as she dove into the chaos. Plasma fire streaked across the void. Explosions lit the darkness like false dawns. Through the bond, Kethra's presence anchored her, his thoughts weaving with hers, his instincts guiding her movements. Left flank collapsing. He warned. I see it. Her exosuit pivoted, unleashing a torrent of railgun fire that shredded a squadron of Dominion drones. Before they could break through the line, cruiser, Hammerfall needs cover, she said. On it, Kethra's ground forces boarded an enemy battleship, planting quantum charges deep within its reactor core. Seconds later, the massive vessel erupted in a brilliant sphere of light. It was a slaughter. Both sides fought with a fury born of survival. Ships were torn apart. Warriors were ripped from the stars. But neither side yielded. And then, the Dominion revealed their true weapon. 4. The Leviathan was not a ship. It was a world. A biomechanical superstructure larger than Earth's moon. It emerged from the depths of the rift like a nightmare-given form. Its surface bristled with weaponry, and at its core pulsed a singularity cannon capable of obliterating entire planets. This is their endgame, Kethra said, his voice heavy with awe and dread. If that cannon charges, Earth is gone. Mara finished. The Allied fleet threw everything they had at the Leviathan. Battleships rammed its hull. Swarms of fighters streaked into its superstructure like angry hornets. But the Dominion's flagship was too vast, too powerful. Its shields regenerated faster than they could be broken. We can't destroy it from the outside. Mara said. Then we destroy it from within. They knew what that meant. It meant Unity Protocol, the final, forbidden merging of their minds. Not just a bond, Not just a fusion, a complete and irreversible unification. It would give them the power to override the Leviathan systems from within. But it would also erase them as individuals. Mara, Kethra said gently, if we do this, there will be no you, no me, only us. She looked at him, her heart hammering. We've been us for a long time now. The final bond that initiated the protocol. The surge was unlike anything they had felt before. It was not just minds merging, it was souls. Boundaries dissolved, identities blurred, memories, fears, dreams, all became a single, seamless tapestry. They were no longer Mara and Kethra. They were something new, something vast, something alive, something that could touch the stars themselves through the Leviathan's neural core. They spread like fire. Systems buckled and bent to their will. The singularity cannon shut down. Reactor conduits reversed. Control matrices turned against their masters. The Dominion screamed in fury as their greatest weapon betrayed them. Now, Admiral Park roared. The Allied fleet unleashed everything, every missile, every plasma lance, every ounce of power left in their guns. The Leviathan's core collapsed inward, imploding under its own mass. A shockwave ripped through the rift, scattering Dominion ships like autumn leaves in a storm. The battle was over. The Dominion was broken. Vi. Legacy when the vigilant Dawn returned to Earth weeks later. Its crew was hailed as heroes. Statues were commissioned. Histories were rewritten. The Dominion, once the galaxy's greatest terror, had vanished into the void. But amid the celebrations, one truth remained unspoken. Mara Ellison and Kethra were gone. Not dead. Not lost, simply transformed. Some said they had become part of the Leviathan's wreckage. Their consciousnesses forever entwined with the debris drifting through space. Others believed they had ascended, a new kind of life form, watching over the galaxy from beyond. The truth was more mysterious still. Sometimes, in the quiet between stars, ships reported strange transmissions. Faint pulses of thought, half human and half Zarok. Whispering words that no machine could decode. Words of warning, words of hope. And somewhere, out beyond the reach of any fleet, a new star pulsed softly, steady, warm, alive. It was not named by humans or Zarok. It did not need a name. It was the bond, eternal and undying. Two warriors, two souls, one mind. And because of them, the galaxy would endure. Epilogue centuries later. Children in both human and Zarok schools still learn the story. They learn how one soldier and one alien dared to trust each other when the universe said they should be enemies. How their courage forged a peace that spanned stars, and in every telling, the final lesson is always the same. Unity is not about sameness. It is about strength born from difference, and it all began with one human soldier and an 8-foot alien giant.